yeah, to get the software, you just go to the ODF Validator GitHub page. There'll be a link to that, and on the right there is a releases tab. So if you look under the software releases, you get a list of releases. The most recent release is always on the top. They are pre-releases at the moment because we haven't had a full official release. We'll have a release candidate out on the middle of next week. Well, it'll be out this week, but the announcement will be middle of next week. On each, I'll just pause this briefly to allow me to talk, just to say that each software piece of software, each release, has several artifacts attached to it, which you can see in the list at the bottom of this page. There's a beta-all jar. So that's basically a standard fat jar, but it requires you have Java downloaded on your Java installed on your machine to run it. You could also use that as a developer to plug into the API parts if you so desired, although the Maven modules, it's modular in Maven, and downloading the core module for Maven is a better bet for that. And then beneath that, there are 3 platform-specific builds. Now, these don't require Java on your machine. They're Graal VM-based builds. There's been one, that's the first time I've used Graal VM for something like that. There's the teething problems are around the way that it includes artifacts that from your own code. You have to be quite specific what you wanted to include, and there's not that many good profiling tools for building that up. So I've spent quite a long time making sure that these are complete, and I believe they are now. So you have the first one's a version for Linux. Below that, there's a Mac exclusive build, and then finally the Windows build at the bottom there, third from the bottom, which has got the awkward exe extension because that's the only way it will run on Windows. And then the last 2 after that are the source code. So what I'm doing here is downloading the beta version for Linux. I'm just renaming it here so I don't have to type out that full name. The name when I download it will just be ODF Validator, and I'm saving it to a directory. In my case, I know the directory is on my path, so I can just type ODF Validator and it will work. If you don't have it on your path, you'll have to type the full path. And finally, this is how you do it on Linux or a chmod plus X, but make it executable so you can run it as a program. You can usually do that from the file explorer on your platform of choice. And then there's just one more bit of this, which is the demonstrations will be are in clearer text than this, but this is me just double checking that I have chmod plus X, which is make it executable, and then from the command line just type ODF Validator help, and that will give you a list of help commands. But that's the end of that demonstration. I'm now going to give software demonstrations, but they're actually a little bit more stylized. I've recorded these, but in a different fashion. So just to say, these are an ASCII cinema files. So I will be playing back the casts, and these will be available on the project website with the files I demonstrate on. So if just to allow people to test the features themselves and get up to speed. So I'm going to share this now. ASCII cinema play. So this first one, I'm just going to demonstrate validating a perfectly valid spreadsheet file. So, and a little bit about output format. So I'll talk as it goes. So at the moment, I'm just asking for the help. So this is the standard help on from ODF with the extensions. We'll talk about these options a little bit as it goes. But yeah, help at any stage. But by simply typing ODF Validator in the name of the file, you will get a validation report. We'll come back to the validation report in a minute, but just as a demonstration, by typing -o and an output format, you can request JSON or XML versions. They're intended for automated processing rather than user processing. And for the purpose of these demonstrations, I will tend to use the standard text output. I will just scroll back so you can see that the information in these files is very, very similar. It tells you the file name, a list of results here, and you have the messages with IDs that you'll see further down, but they're just encoded in JSON and an XML for machine parsing. And finally, you have a report that tells you whether the file was true and valid, the format and the version. But again, that's the same stuff in XML, but here, the simplest from using it in the command line yourself is the text version, particularly since some of the output's color coded and it gives you a better idea if something's gone wrong. And all this message is telling us here is that it is indeed a valid ODS. So it's a open document spreadsheet file. Validation, the version 1.3, so it's a version 1.3 it was detected, so it's an ODF version 1.3 file. The MIME type is open document spreadsheet, and there are no other errors or warnings. So this is, I can tell you it's valid, but it's very, very sparse, the file is. It's a synthetic file that's produced for testing. So that's what valid output would look like, all green. I'm going to just go straight on to the second one of these, which shows you what's invalid output looks like. So here we go. In this case, I'm just going to first invoke it on the valid file again that you've seen above. This was just so that when they stand alone, you can see what valid output looks like in comparison to next file. It will be an invalid file, and this is missing the MIME entry I was talking about previously. And you can see here that errors turn up in red as long as you've got a compatible terminal. I know Maria's got cases when she's been testing where not all terminals show show colors, but for the most part, if your terminal is a X256 color terminal, you should get color coded entries. It will depend on the theme you have for your terminal. I've adopted this one to try to make the output clear. So here you can see similar messages before. It will tell you that it's an open document version 1.3, but then it says that it can't detect a MIME type. So an open document package shall contain a MIME type file if the manifest contains a manifest file entry whose manifest full path attributes to the value /. So that's when I was saying earlier, you don't have to put a MIME type file in, but then you have to make certain amendments to the manifest file if you're not going to supply a MIME type file. And in this case, the manifest file indicates that you would expect to find a MIME type file and what isn't there. So that's a single validation error and the one info message, and the validation error is pretty clear. The MIME type part that's here, I don't know if you can see that I've highlighted. That's actually the file name, where the name of the file that we expect to find, or very often the name of the file where it's found an issue, just for reference. On to the next one. So yeah, the invalid files look like so, but the thing you're most likely to encounter in the wild are files exhibiting extended conformance. And extended conformance is a way of adding features into a document, not necessarily a spreadsheet, that weren't supported in the original schema. Now, you can ask for extended validation. It's not implemented by default. So what I will show you here, how this tends to manifest itself is this file was converted from Excel, and it definitely exhibits extended conformance. As you can see here, there's two errors saying that these two styles and context XML both use extended namespaces, and those extended namespaces are outside of and are unexpected. So here, if you look at the help, you can see there's an E option to invoke extended validation. And if I add that E option here, I do get a valid file. The two error messages have actually been converted to info messages because it's useful to know if the file actually exhibits or uses extended namespaces, and if it does, which they are. So it still lists the extended namespaces as info messages, but they're no longer validation errors. So yeah, in a lot of cases, if it warns you about extended namespace prefixes and you want to know if the file's valid apart from that, invoke with a -e, and you should get you'll get the right result. It's quite possible to invoke and still get errors. For instance, the MIME type file I showed earlier, you could add an extended flag to that. It would still be invalid because the error is beyond that. Now, the next thing I'm going to demonstrate is Maria touched on. So the software has a built-in preservation profile for spreadsheets. And this was a set of criteria that were developed by DNA, working with OPF, NANETH, and the Estonian National Archive in particular at that stage. And these were undesirable features, things that they didn't want in the spreadsheets they preserved. And so the profile is built in. You can simply invoke it by using the -p, and that's on the bottom of the help there. So if you add a -p to your call, it will invoke the spreadsheets profile. And I will just play the next demo and talk you through that as it goes. So in this case, it's a file that was prepared that's got macros in, which are one of the undesirable features listed in the policy. So if we look here, first, I'm just probably like to invoke it without the policy file at all, just to show that without the policy file, it's invalid, but only because it uses an extended namespace. So that's another extended name. If I add the extended namespace flag and validate, I get an E. I get no errors. It just notes the use of extended namespaces. But if I add a profile, you get different results. Although it's going fast, the results should stay on the screen long enough for us to be able to discuss. So yeah, there we go. The first of those two results is just invoking the profile with no extended conformance, and then you can see you've got a few errors. The doc error is to say that it uses an extended namespace, but the errors after that are policy errors. Policy 8, basic standard. So this is the file basic standard module 1 XML macros check. This file must not contain any macros, so it's just highlighting the fact that it does. The next error down, policy 2, is because it doesn't actually pass validation, which is one of the policy requirements. There's a warning then that the warning is another policy warning, but this is simply to say that it's an empty spreadsheet, that the file has got no values or objects in any cell. And again, something that's at least worth warning about when you're preserving, because you end up with a file that just has empty spreadsheets. You probably don't want to preserve it. There's probably some kind of problem. And then another content XML file with macros. And then by putting extended conformance on with the policy and the next one down, you see that the error, doc8 error, becomes an info because it's just saying it uses extended conformance, but the main errors with the macros and lack of values, the warning for lack of values is still present. The list of criteria is on the project website, but they're not changeable at the moment. The profile is a fixed profile that's built in, but the rules are coded in such a way that you can write your own rules. It might have to be programmatic, or you could write them as schematron and then just invoke the schematron file. But schematrons are not that user friendly. Okay, then, and finally, I'm just going to have one more demonstration, just as a declaration that one thing that it doesn't support is password protection or encrypted files at the moment. So if it can detect encryption, but it won't validate the file, and you will get something along these lines, where it simply says that it's detected encrypted entries for the meta XML, settings XML, the styles XML and content XML, and then warns you that the validation is incomplete because encrypted entries are not supported. The other warning, the one about thumbnails, is a genuine validation warning. You're supposed to have a thumbnail file that, for use in file browsers, etc., that gives you a nice thumbnail of the document, but they're not mandatory. But the specification says it is a warning.